watercolor techniques are going to be used for your contrast composition that we talked a little bit about yesterday. So the goal with this is that you guys will have a better idea of how you can use these different techniques in your composition that's going to use ink, so you'll be using Sharpie as well as watercolor. You don't have to have a permanent, well, it has to be permanent. It doesn't have to be specifically a Sharpie, but if you don't have your permanent marker yet, make sure you have that by next week because we will be using that as well. Okay, so you can see there are lots of different techniques on here. The first one that I'm going to show you is dry brush. You guys are each going to get a can of watercolors. These brushes, these flat brushes, see how they are flat across? They are going to work really well for a lot of these techniques as opposed to a round brush. So some of your watercolors will have round brushes in them, which are useful for certain techniques, but the flat brush is really good too. So what you're going to do for your dry brush technique, you are going to put just a little bit of water on your brush. You can use your newspaper to kind of blot some of the water off of your brush, and you're going to go in and you can choose whatever color you want for this process. The goal is that your brush is kind of dry. So you can see I'm using my newspaper to kind of test to see what it's going to look like, and then you're just going to brush on there. So dry brush obviously is called so because it doesn't use a lot of water, so you see some of the white of the paper showing through. That is the goal there. So it looks kind of like a rough texture, which would be really useful. Can you guys think of anything you'd want to have a rough texture for if you were painting something? Can you think of something that has a rough texture?
Trees.
Trees, fantastic. Yes, trees is a very good example. So you could also put a color underneath of that, so you could layer your colors up in that way. So like if you were specifically doing trees, and you had something like this brown here, if you had like a light brown underneath, when that's dry, then you can go back over with your dry brush and layer it up so you have two different values of brown on there. Okay, next technique we are going to go over. We're going to start this technique and we'll finish it later. It is called rubber cement resist.
Yeah, I know what that is.
So what you do, what is it, Gussie?
Huh?
What is rubber cement resist?
It's like glue.
It's like glue, exactly. Can you think of what the difference between like a school glue and a rubber cement would be?
Rubber cement is better to use
For?
It dries like
for anything.
Okay,
When you
so,
put it on the
tell
wall,
you that.
when
She
hang
can
stuff
tell you
on
that
the wall,
answer.
okay, so Madison said it dries like hot glue. It's kind of similar to hot glue in how it dries. Hot glue dries kind of like a plastic. Rubber is a type of plastic. It dries like rubber. So the benefit of it is that it's easy to peel up when it dries. So like if you're mounting an artwork, for example, and you have like little glue lines, that can be avoided if you use rubber cement because you can wipe up the glue lines and it peels up just like rubber. So you can see it has a little brush in here. What you're going to do is dribble some rubber cement on your paper. When that dries, which it takes a little while to dry, like it's going to take a half hour to an hour to dry most likely, depending on the thickness, then you're going to go over top of it with whatever color you want to use, and then you peel up the rubber cement by just moving your finger back and forth on the page, and then you've got a resist. So similar to how we did our stitching with our sketchbooks, or our sketchbook fabrics, you have a resist wherever the rubber was, just like you have a resist wherever the stitching was. It's going to show the color beneath through. So this example here, you can see the white shows through. If you painted a color down first, then that color would show through. So really useful in things like keeping your edges nice and clean. Like if you wanted to do like a nice curved edge, what you could do is place a piece of paper on top, paint rubber cement around it. Then when you go to do your watercolor, it's not going to go in the area where you have your rubber cement. So that's a good way to get a nice sharp edge. Okay. Next technique. This one's kind of fun. This one is called alcohol dispersal. What you're going to do is you're going to, and you can choose whatever colors you want to use for these techniques. If you have an idea of what you're doing for your contrast project, then try and use some of the colors you think you might want to use for that project so you can kind of test and see what it's going to do. Alright, so alcohol, what alcohol does is it disperses the pigment in the watercolor. So what you're going to do is tilt the alcohol bottle to the side, pick up a little bit of alcohol in your dropper, and you're just going to drop it, and it creates rings. So there it is wet. Here's an example of what it's going to look like when it's dry. Watercolor tends to dry a little bit lighter, just so you guys know. What do you think this texture could be used for? What do you think of when you look at this? Can you think of anything that you might want to use it for if you were drawing or painting an object? Any ideas? It kind of reminds me of like cells or like planets, like craters on the moon type dealy. So that's just an option for you as well. It creates like little rings of color where color has been dispersed away. So the opposite of the alcohol dispersal is salt absorption. So salt, as opposed to dispersing color, absorbs it. So what you're going to do is choose your color that you want to paint. You're going to take the salt, a little bit in your hand, about this much, doesn't take a whole lot, and you're just going to sprinkle it on there, and you can kind of see the salt pulls the color from the paper. So I'm just going to dump the rest on there. You want to leave it on there until the watercolor dries. So leave it on there for 10-15 minutes, and you'll get an effect that's kind of speckled. So you can see that you just get a variety of different values with the salt absorption. Okay, your next technique is flat wash. For flat wash, you want to use a flat brush. So you want to make sure it's flat across, it doesn't have any roundedness to it. And you're just going to go in with whatever color you want to choose. You want to have even amounts of color and water when you're doing the flat wash. And I've got a little bit of salt. I'm just going to shake off the loose salt there. So you're just going to brush straight across. So as you go down, you want to make sure you're pulling pigment. So if you go over it a few times, you're pulling pigment with you so that it's a uniform value across. So even amounts of pigment and water. The alternate to flat wash is a graded wash. And the way you're going to do a graded wash is use more pigment to water, so less water, more pigment on your first brush across. Then you're going to wash your brush off. And if you guys need to come closer, you can come closer if you can't see. And you're going to overlap, but start to drag that color down. So I'm washing my brush each time in between. And it's going to get lighter and lighter as I go down. So that's a graded wash because it transitions slowly from dark to light. And sometimes you need to go back over it a little bit. If it looks like your transition isn't quite smooth, you can kind of go back and wash over it with water a little bit and smooth it out. I'm looking to see if I have an example of a graded wash. So here you can see flat wash, even amounts of pigment versus graded wash, more pigment at the top, more water at the bottom, so it's basically a fade. Okay, so next technique involves lifting color off the page, but not with the help of salt, with the help of a paper towel. So you're going to choose your color, then you're going to go in with a paper towel, and you're going to create a small edge on it just by twisting it up, and you're just going to go in and lift color off the page. So then once you lift a little bit, you just move it and place it in a different spot, and it lifts a little bit more as you go. You can get dramatic effects with this if you use a lot of color and really use your paper towel for a long time. If you place your paper towel on the paper for a long time, it's this technique right here. So it'll lift it right up. It kind of just depends on how dark your color is and how long you put the paper towel in there. You can see this is more dramatic, but that's darker than this. So that's your basics of lifting. What do you think you could use this technique for? What does this kind of look like? What if it was blue? What would it look like? Yeah, it might look kind of like clouds. So that's a technique you can use for that. Okay, let's see. Sgraffito. Does anyone remember from Art 1 what sgraffito means? I think most of the Art 1 teachers go over it. Anyone remember?
Yes, once you scrape off.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so sgraffito is the Italian word for to scratch. So when you scratch into a surface, that's sgraffito. So it's done on pottery a lot. I do it with oil pastels with my Art 1 classes. But you can do it with the watercolor media as well. So what you're going to do, you can do it dry or wet. So if you want to do it dry, you do it before you put the watercolor down. And you just take your paper clip here and you create a design scratching into the paper. And it just scratches the surface. It takes off a layer of the paper basically. So then you're going to go and wash over it. Oops. Always wash your brush off before you dip your color. I made a mistake there, but that's okay. If you put, I have purple in my brush and I went in the red. If that happens, just get it out with your brush and clean your brush off and then go for whatever color you're going for again. So you paint over it and you can see whatever design you scratched in will be darker than the design. Can you guys see what I scratched?
Mm-hmm. Yes. You scratched purple, right?
I scratched right there.
I'm a little colorblind, my bad.
Well, you're kind of listening because I was talking about purple a little bit. But make sure you're watching too. And if you can't see, just stand up and come a little closer. So it's going to be darker. I scratched a checkerboard. You can also scratch when the watercolor is wet. And you... Well, that one doesn't want to go. But you can see that it also creates those darker lines, but you have to be careful. I scratched a little too deep there. It's easier to control when you do it before you put the color on, but you do get similar effects if you do it wet as well. It's just a little thicker. So if you're wanting to do more detailed, do it when the paper's dry. Next technique is called wet on wet. What you're going to do for wet on wet is you're going to paint water on the surface of your watercolor paper. You want to really saturate it. Watercolor paper is designed to absorb paint and water, moisture, so you don't have to worry about getting it too wet. That should be just fine. Then you're going to go in, and for this you generally want to use colors that are similar to one another. I dropped in some blue, and because the paper is already wet, it spreads out significantly, and then I'm going to go and drop in a little bit of purple. I can overlap it and you get kind of like a spreading type effect with that. I don't want to pick it up too much, but I'll tilt it a little bit so you guys can see. So it's just a nice way for the colors to kind of fade together and blend. Again, you generally want to stay with colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Generally these palettes are in Roy G. Biv order, but sometimes they're not because as they get older we replace the little pans of color, but you can see red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and then there's also a brown and a black in this particular palette. Okay, straw blowing. So what you do with straw blowing, and this will be kind of fun for you guys, you are going to take a straw. You'll notice that these have the bendy bendies. You don't want to use the flexible part of the straw. Dusty, can you stick with us, please? Okay, so you can cut a length of straw that's about 2 inches long, will be just fine. What you're going to do for this technique is take your paintbrush, and you don't have to use a flat brush for this. Actually, the rounded brushes work a little bit better. You don't want a whole lot of moisture on it, but moist enough that you can make the color drop onto the page. You're going to squeeze a drop of color onto the page so you have a little droplet. Then you are going to take your length of straw, and the angle is very important here, so you're going to get down low so you are near the surface of the table, and you are going to directionally blow air out of the straw in whatever direction you would like for that drop to move. So basically you're taking a dot and you're turning it into a line. It'll come out looking something like this. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate for you so you guys can see. So once you I knew that would be funny for you guys, but once you kind of get it to go in one direction, then you can move your paper and you can use the direction of your paper to determine which way you want this droplet to go. So obviously if I want it to go up, I'm going to blow this way. So the cool thing about this is you get a really natural looking branching pattern. Can anyone tell me what you might want to use this technique for? A tree is the most obvious one, but also they call this pattern dendritic because our lungs also look like this, roots look like this, so it's a common pattern found in nature that you can use the straw blowing effect for. I think I'm coming down the pike here, but I want to show you guys Q-tip. So all you do with the Q-tip is you dip it in your watercolor. You want a little bit of water in there, but you don't need a whole lot. And you're just going to point, 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 similarly to how we did our dot paintings. Does anyone remember any other word for artwork that uses dots? There are two words that I can think of. One pertains to when you paint with dots, and one pertains to when you do linear shading with dots with like a pencil or a pen. Anyone remember what they're called from Art 1?
Stippling.
Pointillism and stippling. Fantastic. Okay, so pointillism, tiny little dots close together. That was a really popular art style when photography was just kind of like becoming mainstream around 1900 because people were thinking of pixels or points. So it became really evident in artworks. I thought I had a picture of one over there, but I don't. I'll show you guys another time. So pointillism is when you use paint to do it. So the Q-tip technique is a pointillism technique. And when you do it with a pencil or pen, it's typically called stippling. So those are the two there. Did I miss any? Plastic wrap. What do I need to do? Plastic wrap. Okay. So plastic wrap is another one that you've got to do and then just wait to see the effect. But what you're going to do is you're going to paint whatever color you'd like. And you can use these techniques in conjunction with one another too. Like for plastic wrap, I could do the wet on wet technique and also do plastic wrap. It doesn't just have to be one color. So you can definitely use them in conjunction with one another to get some cool effects. So all you're going to do is take some plastic wrap, and you don't even need this much, but you're just going to put it over top of your wet paint and let it dry on there, and you will get an effect that looks something like this. Does anyone have any ideas of what you might want to use that technique for, like if you were painting something like this one? Does it remind you of anything visually? Like
Frog.
looks like a frog. That's kind of interesting. I think it kind of looks like ice personally, but you know, that's just me. But you can see this is an example here of both plastic wrap and straw blowing. So it kind of gives like an ethereal, like icy tree kind of effect type dealy. That's an example that I did for one of my other classes. The only one that I haven't showed you guys yet is splatter, but I need a toothbrush to do that, and I don't have one over here, so I'll just show that to you guys another time. But basically all you do is put the toothbrush in there and splatter your color on top in a controlled fashion so as not to get it everywhere, and it just gives you a nice splattery kind of. If you do white like on a darker background, it kind of gives you like a galaxy effect, like you would see for like, you know, representing little stars and planets and stuff. So that's kind of fun too. But I think that pretty much takes care of it. And again, I'm going to try and post this video to Google Classroom, so that's a wrap.